Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Braxcast. This is the 60th episode of the Braxcast, and we've got a pretty exciting episode. Of course, want to mention that I had another episode of Braxcast Live. There's a lot of rambling about history, but it was fun as always. I'm getting really into live streaming, and you guys are as well. Seems like I'm building up a decent live stream audience. I've got some regulars like Student of God, Macabre Derek, Beneath Floors, Park in my streams, and of course, Garfield's Bizarre Adventure. We had an absolutely lovely time, and we were talking about the Horseman because, of course, we've got the Horseman #1 launching its collection. It was announced on Thursday, and then it dropped on Friday. Already sold over 2,000 books, closing in on that $100,000 mark. I think item #3 has sold over 9,000 books, and I believe it's around $530,000 in total sales. But we're going to focus on Horseman. Of course, Horseman #1 is continuing the story of Horseman as established in Horseman Welcome to Forest Park. That was a 96-page one-shot graphic novel that established the character and got him in the area of Forest Park. And of course, with Horseman #1, he is getting back into the game of crime fighting in Forest Park with Cal Buxton, as you see pictured here in this really epic one-shot spread of Horseman striking a pose in his new costume. Of course, he's got that very shiny bat that was in the Horseman #1 trailer. He's definitely used it fighting in Horseman Welcome to Forest Park. So the melee weapons are definitely part of his sure, attire is the best way to put it, but it's definitely part of his setup. Absolutely love it. And we got Cal Buxton, who's getting Horseman back in the game, offering him to really scale up his operation. So this is going to be the impetus for him getting back into the vigilante crime fighting when, spoilers for Horseman Welcome to Forest Park, the Alpha Corps do save Horseman from getting killed by Blitz and Sturm. But of course, with that, they know his identity and they tell him to basically just go straight and stop doing the vigilante stuff and just leave it to the Alpha Corps and the authorities. Of course, Cal Buxton is going to basically very publicly get Horseman back into the game. And we'll see how that turns out. But very exciting to see. And also another thing that we are going to be getting with the Horseman is, of course, some not quite a #0, not quite getting into his origins, I imagine, since this is only going to be a 56-pager and it's going to focus more on the current timeline in Forest Park. But it looks like we are going to get some scenes from his time in the military. Of course, we know that Hector was an Army Ranger. That's why he's so skilled at hand-to-hand combat and with weaponry, guns and such. And we have the unit of the 4 Horsemen, and he was the last of the Horsemen, which is why he has the entire name and the I guess persona of being the Horseman in terms of that costume as well. And it does look like we'll get a little bit of that origin of his time in the military. We'll get a little bit more context, but I don't think it's going to be a true #0 in terms of telling of the true origin. But of course, absolutely love to see that costume. And then one thing I do want to mention before we get into the covers is that there are signed and graded for these Horseman books. There's also going to be signed and graded copies for Zalen and the first 2 Great War Separation books. So those are available in their respective collections, with Great War Separation 2 having both 1 and 2. So that's 12 more slabs, and of course with these, so there's 16 new slabs that launched this week. So of course, if you're into collecting those, you'll have a lot to choose from. I definitely picked some up myself, but those are going to have a much longer leading time as Zalen and Great War Separation than everything else, which I think honestly is the way to do it, to launch the Signature Series slabs at a later time, so that way they don't hold up the rest of everything getting shipped, because it takes a long time, to get them signed, and then you got to send them to Palmetto, Florida, which is where CGC is based off of, and then they got to grade everything and then send them back, and they got to package it. So there's a lot of logistical complications with the graded copies. But of course, I absolutely love the golden slabs. I've shown them off. And when I do get Horseman and review it eventually, it's coming around the time that I move. So it's going to be probably a bit of time. It's not going to happen right at the beginning of fulfillment like it usually does with everything else. But I will review and show off all of these slabs, of course. But I definitely wanted to keep you guys in the know, because I did talk about it on the live stream. But I know not everybody watches the live streams, that there are basically 16 graded copies that launched this week. The 4 for Horseman #1, and then of course Great War Separation 1 and 2, having all their covers, and then Zalen as well. All going to be signed by Chuck Dixon because they typically go for the writer. But speaking of Horseman #1, or to bring it back to Horseman #1, we've got these covers. So of course this is 4 covers, really settling into having 4 covers a book. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Of course, this is the A cover done by Kanan White. Art director at the Rippaverse does an absolutely fantastic job of doing art for the Rippaverse. That cover art, the interior artist for sure, Saoirse, did a fantastic job on that short story. And of course, all of his covers are absolutely fantastic. This might just be the best cover for Saoirse. And on live stream, we noticed this guy looks a lot like Santuan. Of course, I believe this is Cal Buxton, and then we've got the Alpha Core here as well. So the Alpha Core are going to make an appearance. And when I interviewed Chuck Dixon, he did mention that Alpha Core and Horseman are going to be crossing over quite a bit. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Alpha Core reacts to Cal Buxton getting Horseman back into the game. Of course, him inevitably getting back into the game with the new costume and such, which looks really epic in this one shot here. I love the gold accents, the blue, and of course you've got that really, I think at this point it's becoming the iconic like knight logo for the Horseman. By that is cover A, done by Kanan White, colored by Candace Hahn. We're moving on to the B cover, if I can get it. So this is cover B, and this is a pretty significant one in terms of who the artist is. This is Mark S. Miller. He's worked on Injustice. He's definitely a well-known comic artist, respected by a good portion of the community, not respected by others, but I don't want to get into that. This is colored by Diego Albuquerque, of course, with Mike S. Miller doing the line art. Looks really cool. Absolutely love this. This is the retro cover. Cover B has been settling in to be the retro cover for the Rippaverse, and it's basically mandatory to have a retro cover. That's the way the fans view it. Honestly, I am in total agreement. Absolutely love the approved by the Rippaverse Code of Ethics. You've got the Horseman back to action, driven by revenge, surrounded by enemies, but about to meet his biggest fan. That's Cal Buxton. And then this is introducing Daltrey, Fat, Prissy, and Cal Buxton. Of course, we know who Cal Buxton is. He was the one who did the voiceover, but this most likely here is Fat. But I absolutely love these retro covers, not because of just how they're stylized. They are typically always drawn really well. I absolutely love them. And I think Mike Miller did a great job of getting a really interesting scene here. But I always love these character names because this is the first time we get to see the names of the characters during that pre-order phase before we actually get to read the book in and of itself and actually find out what's going on. But we are going to meet some new characters: Daltrey, Fat, Prissy, and Cal Buxton. So those are I'm not sure if those are going to be the 4 horsemen. Maybe Cal Buxton was one of the horsemen. Who knows? That kind of has the implication there. But we know that the 4 horsemen believe were separate. And I think the way Hector talks about them in Horseman Welcome to Florist Park seems like he's the only one that survived. Maybe he thinks he's the only one that survived and they all did and they all just appear later. Who knows? But we're going to definitely find that out once we get the first issue of the ongoing series. Next is the C cover. This is usually a foil and embossed cover. This is the special, the most limited edition cover, typically done by Jack Jadson, colored by Brandon Ward, and you've got this pretty epic close-up shot of Horseman. Of course, you've got the reflection here of him about to save the day from someone getting mugged, and then you've got the rain as well. It just makes it a really, really gritty cover. Absolutely love it. It's a really good one for the foil and emboss, which typically is something like this, where it has a massive focus on one character, especially for the Great War Separation 1 and 2, just being shots of Brian Solari, right? But this is absolutely fantastic. I do love to see this. Definitely Jack Jadson, I believe, did some cover work for one of the covers of Great War Separation, so it's nice to see him put out another fantastic cover for Horseman #1. And finally, In terms of covers, we've got the D cover. This is going to be the mass print cover. This is done by Admira Wajaya, if I'm saying that correctly. I believe this is the first cover that was revealed in the Rip-A-Veal. Of course, Horseman number 1 was talked about in the Rip-A-Veal, and that's what we knew. There was more Horseman on the way. It was known to us as Horseman number 2 because it was the second Horseman book, but really what Horseman number 2 is Horseman number 1, the beginning of the ongoing series, which starts right after the end of Horseman Welcome to Forest Park, which is the fantastic spot to have Horseman have Hector's ongoing series and be able to tie in his story with other stuff that goes on in the Rippaverse, because so much of it is going to centralize around Forest Park, especially if you read Blood Roof number 1 and you got access to Dokuman's little monologue where he basically explicitly states a lot of stuff is going to happen, and it's all going to happen in Forest Park. So Horseman definitely is going to be part of that action. It's going to be really, really cool to see that go down in his ongoing series. But this is a really nice shot of Horseman, of course, staying on a building. He's covered in blood, which really shows his gritty vigilante character, and of course, decked out with those guns as well. Fantastic cover, and of course, you got that Horseman logo. So this is probably, not probably, this definitely is a very simple cover, but it really works for being the mass print cover. And this is, of course, $15. This is a 56-pager, so they've definitely been able to get that down below $20 for 72 pages and less, which is absolutely fantastic. And hopefully we don't have to wait too long before we get Horseman number 2. But of course, Joe Bennett is the workhorse of the Rippaverse in terms of interior art, working on 2 ongoing series now. I'm a little bit hectic that we are getting Horseman number 1 before Alpha Core number 2. It's going to be almost probably 2 years between 1 and 2 for Alpha Core, and that's a little bit unacceptable for me. So I think Joe is going to have to work on Horseman and Alpha Core, and that's basically going to be it. And if we get more Zalen, I know I've been told by Andrew that he won't want anybody else to draw Zalen, but I think you'd have to give like a limited Zalen series to someone like Jack Herbert. I think Joe is going to have too much on his plate if he has to do anything more than 2 ongoing series. That's just my opinion. Of course, Joe is a fantastic artist and he seems to work decently quickly. Of course, we've got Zalen, which is an 80-pager, which should be coming out by the end of this quarter. Of course, we've got Horseman number 1, which is going to be fulfilling mid to late June. And we've got Alpha Core number 2, which I'm sure is pretty deep into production at this point. And like I said, hopefully it's the next book, because I think it's been a bit too long since for Alpha Core. For me personally. And like I said before, Alpha Core is my most anticipated book in Alpha Core number 2, I should say, is my most anticipated book of the Rippaverse. But of course, this is going to be a really exciting one. A lot of people absolutely love the character of Horseman ever since he was introduced to us, the fans, at MegaCon 2024. And I started the Braxcast talking about Horseman, speculating on Horseman, where I thought he was Sam Wilford. Of course, I was massively wrong about that, but it was a fun little theory at the time, and it was what started the Braxcast, was just talking about the character of the Horseman. And of course, getting that full graphic novel later that year at the end of 2024 with his collection launching in September. We got that book in November onwards. Absolutely fantastic book, and I'm really glad he's getting an ongoing series, and it's going to be really cool to see how this develops. And of course, with the character of Cal Buxton, I think it's going to be a really interesting dynamic. And of course, Chuck Dixon is a veteran comic book writer. I've talked about how good of a writer he is, and I've interviewed him on Braxcast number 50, so be sure to check that out if you want more insight into everything that Dixon is doing for the Rippaverse. Because I asked him about Great War Separation, Horseman, and Alpha Core. Of course, those are all the properties that he's working on. He's probably working on other stuff as well. But at the time, everything that was publicly announced, I talked about, and I've covered basically what's currently going on as well. And then we're getting more details about Horseman with this collection. Of course, we'll get more once the book comes out in just a couple of months. But that was the big news for the Rippaverse, other than the CGCs for Great War Separation and Zalen. Nothing else was really announced other than that. Of course, collection launching is always a big thing, so definitely wanted to highlight that. Horseman is writing again. Couldn't be happier to see it. Hopefully we get Alpha Core 2 soon, and of course all the other books on the way. But you can definitely keep up with all of that on the Braxcast, whether you watch these pre-recorded episodes or the live streams. I do 6 p.m. Friday Eastern for now, but I don't have anything other than that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Joker is out.
Thank you for tuning in to the Braxcast. Be sure to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to keep up with the Rippaverse.